Hi guys, this is Kwame bringing you more data set insights. In a previous exercise, I showed you how to create, execute, modify, and delete stored procedures. This exercise will show you how to create a stored procedure with one or more parameters. What is a parameter, you ask? Well, a parameter allows you to filter the results of your query so that you don't have to write many iterations of that query with different criteria. For example, using our bike store database, we have this query that generates a report showing all our customers, the total sales generated by each customer, and the total number of bikes they have purchased. What if one day we need to know only those customers who have purchased less than $5,000 in sales? In another day, we want to know only those customers who have purchased more than 10 bikes. In another day, we want to know the stats for the customer named Mercedes Brooks, and so on and so on and so on. For each one of those cases, we would have to rewrite the query over and over again with a where clause specifying each criterion. That's too much work if you ask me. What we can do instead is write the query once, embed parameters into the query so that we can specify the required criteria through them, store the query, and then execute the query by passing the required criteria through the parameter. Let me show you how to do that. I am going to start off by first putting the query in a stored procedure script. To create a stored procedure, all you have to do is type create procedure and then give the stored procedure a name. So I am going to call this procedure customer parameters. Next, type as on a new line and then input your query. I forgot to mention something in my previous video on stored procedures. When writing the query, you have the option of putting it in a begin and end clause. So begin and end. So this begin and end clause is optional. It's not necessary when you're only dealing with one query in the stored procedure. However, if you're dealing with multiple queries in a stored procedure, then you should have it. I am going to keep it for this stored procedure just to build the habit of using it. So next, I am going to create a parameter. And to keep things simple, it is going to be a parameter for the first name of each customer in our database. So in other words, I want to create a parameter that filters our report based on the first name of each customer provided. Parameters are inputted in brackets. So I'm going to type open bracket, and the name of every parameter must begin with the @ sign. So @ I am going to call this parameter first name, which is appropriate considering what it does. And then I have to specify what data type this parameter is. So since we will be typing in names, the names of customers, which are characters, I am going to make the data type a varchar. So as varchar. I am going to set the limit to max. And that should be it for our parameter. So after creating the parameter, the next thing to do is to reference the parameter in the query itself. Just simply creating the parameter does nothing. You have to reference it in the query itself. And we will do that by creating a where clause for the parameter. So where the first name is equal to the parameter. So that should be it. So once again, we created a procedure called our stored procedure customer parameters, created a parameter that will filter our report based on the first name of each customer that we provide. Specify the parameter to have a varchar data type. Referenced the parameter in the query itself using a where clause. Having done all of that, that should be our query. So if I hit execute, and that should be it. We have created our stored procedure. If I check these Object Explorer in our database folder, and then in the programmability folder, and then in the stored procedure folder, we should have a new stored procedure called customer parameters. If you don't see it, then all you have to do is just wait a few seconds for it to update. So I am going to refresh it and wait a few seconds. So if I open it, and there it is, our new stored procedure. If I want to execute our new stored procedure with a parameter, all I have to do is just type execute, and then the name of the stored procedure that I want executed, which in this case is customer parameters. Now notice what happens when I hit execute. I get a message. It says procedure or function customer parameters expects parameter first name, which was not supplied. So we haven't specified the parameter that we want to pass through this stored procedure. So I am going to type the parameter first name, and then we have to specify the first name that we want to pass through this parameter, which in this case, let's say Penny. So if I hit execute now, we should have the query pull the record for Penny, showing the first and last name of Penny, the total sales generated by Penny, and the total number of bikes purchased by Penny. So I execute, and there it is. We have Penny's first name, we have Penny's last name, we have the total sales generated by Penny, and then we have the total number of bikes purchased by Penny. Let's try someone else. Let's try Joanne. There's no Joanne. Let's try Esther. So there's an Esther in our records. So that's how stored procedures with parameters work. Now imagine if we didn't have it. If we didn't have it, we would have to write the query multiple times, specifying each customer's name using the where clause. That's just too much work. With the stored procedure, all we have to do is just simply type execute, type the stored procedure, and provide the parameter. And that's it. Now let's make things more interesting by adding more parameters to our stored procedure. To modify our stored procedure, all I have to do is to go to the Object Explorer, locate the stored procedure that I want to modify, right click on it, and then click Modify. Now on this screen, all we want to be focused on is the script for the stored procedure. So just this part. Don't worry about this preceding part. So I want to add a new parameter that filters our results based on the total amount of sales over a certain threshold over a certain amount. So I am going to go into my parameter section of the script, put a comma to add a new parameter. I am going to call this parameter max sales. And remember, when we're creating a new parameter, always begin with the @ sign. So max sales. And since I am dealing with a figure, a number amount, I am going to make this the data type for this parameter an integer. So as integer. Now I have to reference this new parameter in the query itself. Now considering that the max sales deals with a function in our query, we can't reference it using a where clause. We can, however, reference it using a having clause in our query. So I am going to type having. I am going to copy the function. So I want this function. I want to filter based on this function. So greater than the parameter, the max sales. So what this essentially does is let the SQL engine know that I want to filter the results to show only those customers that have a total sales in excess of a certain amount, which I am going to specify or provide using this new max sales parameter. So that should be it. We have a total of 2 parameters in this script. So if I execute, our stored procedure will be updated. Let's re-execute the updated stored procedure to see what we get. So execute customer parameters. And then we have 2 parameters, right? We have first name and max sales. So I am going to give each parameter a value, starting with the first name parameter. First name, let's stick with Esther. And I am going to add the second parameter by separating it with a comma. And that parameter is max sales. Don't forget to type at the beginning of each parameter. Now we are going to filter this report to see if Esther has total sales in excess of 5,000. So I am going to set max sales to 5,000, and that will be our threshold. She does. The reason why we got a result for Esther is because her total sales is in excess of 5,000. What if we wanted to see a report showing all the customers that have total sales in excess of 5,000? In other words, I am going to remove this parameter, the first name parameter, and then execute the stored procedure based on only the max sales parameter. Let's see what happens. We got the same error that we had at the beginning, telling us that this stored procedure has a parameter called first name, and we haven't supplied it with a value. So that's the problem with the way we designed the stored procedure earlier. We designed it in a way that all the existing parameters need to have a value for the query to be executed, for the query to generate any report. We can fix that by making some slight adjustments to our stored procedure. This modification will adjust the stored procedure so that we are not forced to always supply every single parameter in the procedure with a value every time we want to execute it. The first thing you need to do to make any parameter optional is to give it a default value. In this case, I want to make the default value for the first name parameter null. And you do that by typing equal and then null. What this pretty much says is that if the first name parameter has a value applied to it, then go on and execute the query. If it doesn't, if no value is applied to it, then ignore it completely. Leave it out of the equation. Don't take it into consideration. So I have adjusted the parameter itself. Now I have to adjust the where clause to take into account the null value. And I do that by turning this into a conditional statement. So I want the parameter first name to be null or first name to be whatever name I supply it. In other words, if the first name parameter has a name supplied to it, then everything's okay. Proceed with executing the query. Or if nothing is supplied to the first name parameter, then ignore the parameter entirely. Don't consider it in the calculation. I am going to do the same thing to the max sales parameter. So I am going to set the default value for this parameter to null. And then I am going to adjust the reference statement by turning it into a conditional statement. So at max sales is null or the total sales is greater than the established amount that I provided. So similarly, right? If a value is applied to the max sale parameter, then everything's okay. Give me something. Execute the query. Or if no value is applied to it, then ignore the max sales parameter entirely. So that should be it. We have modified our stored procedure to make every parameter optional, meaning it is not mandatory that we fill them out with a value. I'm going to click execute, and then hopefully everything will be okay. Let's try our updated stored procedure to see if the parameters are now indeed optional. So I am going to execute this max sales, leaving out the first name parameter to see if I am going to get something. And I did. So I was able to execute this stored procedure by only providing a value to one of the parameters instead of all of the parameters like we were forced to do earlier. In this case, I was able to generate a report showing all the customers that have total sales in excess of 5,000. If I do include the first name parameter, it should still work. Let's go with Sherry. So if I execute this procedure, I should get a record for Sherry only if her total sales is in excess of 5,000. If it isn't, I expect nothing to be displayed. So I am going to execute. As you can see, there happens to be two customers called Sherry, and both of them have total sales in excess of 5,000. So that's how you turn mandatory parameters into optional parameters in SQL. In this exercise, you learn the purpose of stored procedures with parameters, how to create and execute a stored procedure with parameters, how to modify parameters within a stored procedure, and how to make parameters optional. If you have any questions with regards to anything I have discussed, let me know in the comments below.